So the most recent episode of The Bad Batch has given us a good look at the sort of internal politics within the Empire as they transitioned from the clones to the Stormtroopers, and the political momentum it took to make that change. So I figured we could take a closer look at both this political effort and the political effort that surrounded the Military Creation Act, which occurred right before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So in last week's episode of The Bad Batch, we saw the debate raging within the Imperial Senate on whether or not the clones should be phased out, and what should happen with the clones after they're retired. It was discussion about the creation of an entirely new military centered around a recruited force, and a discussion as to the future of the cloning facilities on Kamino, which were, at the time, believed to have been destroyed by a large storm. And a lot of this is actually fairly similar to the discussion that occurred within the Republic Senate immediately prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars, during an event known as the Separatist Crisis. This discussion involved several senators arguing against or for the creation of a Grand Army of the Republic to protect the Republic against the growing Separatist threat. It is sort of in this discussion that the Emergency Powers Act was proposed, which granted Palpatine basically temporarily dictatorial powers, which included the authority to found an army for the Republic, an army that would ultimately become the Clone Army, more formally known as the Grand Army of the Republic. Many within the galaxy view the Military Creation Act, which was pitched by Palpatine before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, as the sort of beginning of the end of the Republic, and many would go on to blame the architects of the Emergency Powers Act and the Military Creation Act for the rise of the Empire. This, by the way, is why Jar Jar Binks has a bad rep in-universe, as he's seen as the one that sort of set all this up. After all, he was the one that pitched the Emergency Powers Act in Padme's absence. So, anyway, after the Clone Wars, there was a discussion. The Emperor wanted to do away with the clones. The clones were a liability. They seemed to have a tendency to question orders from the new Galactic Empire, and they had several key vulnerabilities. For example, all of them being based off of the same genetic template would make them vulnerable to large-scale biological warfare. Really, when it came down to it, it was just cheaper and more practical to recruit a massive military force, or conscript a massive military force, and sort of move away from clones which had to be basically raised from birth to be soldiers. The end result would be a soldier that's less capable, but cheaper to mass produce, and that was the mentality of the Empire. So while this was going on, there was huge debates within the Imperial Senate over what was going to happen with the clones following their retirement, and even whether or not they should be retired at all. As far as the Senate knew, the cities on Kamino, notably Tipoca City, had been completely wiped out by a large storm. Well, many of us know in reality they were destroyed by a bombardment by a line of Imperial Venator-class Star Destroyers. It really is irrelevant at this point how they were destroyed, as the focus was more on the clone troopers themselves. Still, the debate raged on as to whether a massive military was even necessary. The Empire would continue to purport that there were massive insurrections in the Mid-Rim and the Outer Rim, particularly in former Separatist territories, where Separatist sympathizers were holding out. Meanwhile, those who were from the core worlds further away from the Outer Rim, and were maybe more used to the Republic's way of doing politics, sort of questioned that truth. They cast doubt onto not only the nature of these rebellions that the Empire was claiming they were fighting, but the nature of the destruction of Tipoca City itself, some even going as far as to accuse the Empire of carrying out its destruction, something that was ultimately leaked to the Imperial Senate. Now, there was this belief amongst those that leaked it that the information, when it was leaked, would ultimately lead to the rejection of a new military apparatus, but ultimately it backfired, with the clones being painted as heartless monsters who would follow any orders they were given, which isn't necessarily inaccurate, looking at events like Order 66. That drummed up support for a larger recruit force, which could hypothetically make moral decisions and could theoretically make the decision not to follow their leader's commands. Now, obviously, as many of us know, these recruited forces were brainwashed by Imperial propaganda and heavily reprimanded if they decided to go against the wills of their superior officers, so the idea of a Stormtrooper Rebellion at any point was slim. But still, the idea was that the clones were theoretically incapable of resisting these orders, while a recruited force would be able to uphold moral responsibilities to the people of the galaxy. This argument, backed up by the evidence that the clones had followed the orders to destroy Tipoca City, sort of tipped scales in favor of a new military apparatus and would lead to the creation of the Stormtrooper Corps and the modern Imperial Military that we see by the time of the original trilogy. Now, there's actually been this long debate within the Star Wars community as to which faction had better soldiers, the Clone Troopers of the Galactic Republic or the Stormtroopers of the Galactic Empire, and well, I think that's really not a debate nowadays. There actually are still some interesting pros and cons to the transition from the Clone Troopers to the Stormtroopers, and if you'd like to hear more about that, I'll leave a link up here to a video I have on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments if you were a senator within the Imperial Senate faced with this decision of whether or not to replace the clone army. Which side would you fall on? Are you in favor of replacing them for a recruited military apparatus, or do you think sticking with the clones is the best option? And what do you think they should do with the clones once they're retired? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below as well. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.